Hey, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George Affleck.
And it is time for...
UnSpun.
And this is a special edition of UnSpun because we've actually taped this in advance.
Yes.
Because...
I'm not here.
George is not here.
I'm the figment of your imagination.
So you're going on vacay.
I'm going on vacation with the kids.
Well-deserved, little vacation with the children. And we were going to just go a week without UnSpun, but we thought, wait a minute. Let's look back, because I do these crazy sheets.
I don't know, actually, I can't actually read those. They're pretty good, actually.
There's
a reason I don't do these.
But it's kind of our rundown. We chat before we do this, and we don't actually spend a whole heck of a lot of time, because it's pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about. But we've sort of got Amanda Bates, George's wife, takes very good care of keeping us in line, and she keeps a copy of this on file. So when our team, Patrick, George, Amanda, and I were talking about should we take this week off, it was like, well, maybe we can go back through these sheets and see how our unspun effect is working. Because we're new.
Am I full of BS or am I?
You're a genius, dude. How's that, Amanda?
I like it.
She goes, don't overstate it. Don't overstate it. But let's look
back.
By
the way, she's also the VP of my company and a former TV producer, so she's actually got very good qualifications to be telling us what to do.
No doubt.
Yes.
Uber talented, and keeping us in line here, because she does double check some of the times that we go a little extra.
Well, especially me. She knows where I can go sometimes. Keep me, you and
I try. Okay, I'd like to start with, because I mean, we have a list of the things that you have gotten bang on the money right by doing the unspun on whatever the headlines are. And initially, the one that really, the first that hits home for me is when all of the SNC-Lavalin started with Jody Wilson-Raybould being shuffled.
Yeah.
We sat down here and you said...
Demotion.
Yeah, she's totally fired. She's totally demoted.
Totally demoted. Something happened.
Yeah, and everybody's like, no.
No, yeah, she even said no.
Yeah.
So, and then a few weeks later, she said, yeah.
She didn't just say yeah, she goes, yes, and here's why now that I can...
saga continues.
And she's going to, it is going to continue.
She's writing a letter, strongly worded letter to the committee.
Are we going to see that?
Well, it'll be leaked, I'm sure. They're saying it won't be public, but I think it'll get leaked, I would imagine. I'll call that now.
There you go.
Future fact.
This will be our future pre-tape episode if we do a future George fact. In terms of her riding here, because she's South Granville, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Granville South.
And it's a very unusual riding because it's kind of Shaughnessy and it's Main Street. It's got a very weird makeup. Yeah,
but how do you think her constituents feel here about her running again?
Yeah, I would say they're probably divided. I mean, half of it's a very conservative riding, and it has gone back and forth. It's usually a conservative that's in that riding.
Yeah.
So, if she's completely independent, but I think a lot of people like seeing somebody stick it to the man, as it were, literally in this case, I suppose. So I think that they will. I think they're appreciating what she's doing, I'm
going for another George fact. Do you see this?
I would say that she will have no problem getting reelected. I wouldn't want to take her on.
Right. Okay.
Not that I've been asked.
There's a prediction. No, yet. Would you?
No.
Okay. Just checking. The other thing that really pops to mind, I'm an absolute terrified flyer. I hate to fly. I do fly, but I hate it. And when this whole 737 MAX 8
tragedy.
Well, yeah, the tragedy and the controversy surrounding it more so was what we ended up talking about, because it's horrific. 2 aircraft, hundreds of people lost over what? And I was afraid my significant other was headed off to Toronto and he was booked on a 737 MAX 8, and I was like, I don't want him on that plane. And there were many people that are like, you're overreacting, whatever. And I tried to pull my head out of the story long enough to not react emotionally, and you said, here's what is actually going on here.
Yes, the FAA, the manufacturer, if they create new planes, there's a whole process of training that they have to provide then if it's a new plane. And I said that Boeing decided intentionally not to create a new plane, to call it the 737 MAX, but it's actually a completely different plane with a completely different way it flies, and that it was intentional that they did that so they wouldn't have to provide this very costly training.
Yeah.
That you can upgrade for the training as the airlines can upgrade and pay for training, but we don't know how many did or how many didn't. We don't know yet if they. And so I said that was probably based on what's happened here, that this crash is based on potentially, and we're still waiting to find out, that this was the process that happened. And a few days later, the New York Times reported the same story.
You were ahead of the New York Times,
They're
George.
listening to Unspun, I think.
You need to follow George Affleck on Twitter. I'm telling you, this is one of the reasons why George and I have the relationship we do, because we don't go all that far back, but we've always had incredibly insightful. You've always had insights that were like, oh my goodness, aha moments for me as a journalist trying to cover a story. And following you on Twitter, I get these little pieces that I can go, oh, this is something I should read because George has read it and he puts it out there with a little attitude on it, a little unspun. So at George_Affleck. George Facts continues here on the episode 12, because you also, you warned us that the budget of 2019 would have some little gifts in it, but you weren't expecting anything massive. But in that same conversation a couple of weeks ago, you referenced how the Trudeau in the 70s had impact on, was it rental housing?
Yeah, he had the program in the 70s and he had another one in the 80s, and so there's some references to this budget and how it's very similar to some of Trudeau number 1 and his housing policies that Trudeau number 2 is bringing in. So, and I think that's a good idea. There's some good stuff that happened, and more of that is needed. Housing needs to be a national initiative, and I think Trudeau needs to really get more into that. I don't really understand the whole incentive program for
the CMHC,
the and the young
first-time home buyer.
If you live in Vancouver, you still $500,000 for a 400 square foot apartment. It's still tough for my daughter at 22 to come up with that cash, and I don't have it. So.
It very much helped me. I was in my mid-30s the first time I bought a property, and it very much helped me to be able to draw $40,000 out of my RRSPs and have to pay that back over the course of, I think it was a dozen years, or was it 10 years? Without that, I wouldn't have been able to buy the level. But it didn't
have that much money, but I did the same thing.
It doesn't put you in a position of, people are like, the sky is falling, they're handing money away, and it's all going to crash, and we're all going to be left holding the keys to these houses that everybody's claimed bankruptcy and walked away from. I'm like, calm down. It's not that much of a gift. It's just that little bit to maybe help that. If you want the 3-bedroom penthouse, on English Bay,
on day one,
that's not going to happen. But if you're willing to invest in a studio apartment in New West that is connected to the SkyTrain that hopefully eventually goes to UBC where you're attending school, this is actually a really good thing for you. Getting into the market, then you flip that to the next one, it's a 1-bedroom.
I always say, and there's this whole renter versus owner argument that happens, and there's politically you can see the line in BC with the NDP, they're really courting the renters, and the Liberals court the owners, and it's very similar in Vancouver. The line down the middle of who votes. Voters who own vote for NPA, and voters who rent don't vote for NPA. It's very yes, it's very specific, and so there is this mentality. But because frankly, as a parent, the way I can keep my kids in the city is for them to own a piece of the city. So any way that can be possible that they are here for the long term and are invested and have a commitment to the city, I'll be able to keep them around me. That's
the better it'll be.
For me,
and we've exactly. It's all. I mean, we're selfish at the end of the day, George and I here on Unspun. Talking about the empty homes tax, speculation tax, and how the sky is falling. We're headed towards the economic crash.
Well, they're predicting it now, and I said this a couple months ago too. I said that overly wrought taxation systems generally push for a decline in the economy, and Jason Kenney, who's running for the Premier of Alberta, is now actually on his campaign, and this is part of his campaign platform, is to entice non-oil related businesses from BC who are feeling overtaxed. And as a business owner, I can tell you it's much more expensive this year than it was last year to run my business in this province. I can't see moving to Alberta, but I know a lot of companies who will be looking at it, and if there's a better tax structure of 2 or 3%, if your profits are in the millions and you're looking at saving, getting a couple $100,000 a year.
Alberta it is.
Alberta is. Real estate's cheaper. So it's an interesting, and all signs are pointing towards a recession in BC. And people say, well, that's not going to happen. The country's doing great. It's very common that BC goes into a recession when Ontario gets hot. It's actually quite the way it almost always works. BC goes down, Ontario goes up. So if we're heading down, it's not going to be pretty for anybody. And people are celebrating real estate prices going down, but be careful.
But there's that other piece, if I may, of real estate prices going down after watching them go up so rapidly over the last couple of years. They have to correct to a certain degree.
Well, they always do.
Exactly.
Historically, it's like a cycle. It's been a long cycle this time, but generally I grew up, my dad was a realtor.
Yeah.
We were poor for 3 years and then rich for 3 years. And then poor, my dad was terrible at keeping a consistent amount of revenue coming in or saving.
That's how you learn. Yeah.
So, you know.
But would you, if you were the ruler of all things British Columbian, let's say you had the ultimate power, speculation tax, empty homes tax, not the way you would have gone.
No, I'm more of a carrot kind of approach. Like, what incentives can we get people to do what the goal is? So if you want people to rent their basement suites or their empty apartments,
Give them a break.
Give them a break, or do something that you know. I think that there, federally and provincially, there are things that, you know, certainly federally on the taxation side, figuring out who is not paying, you know, who is sitting on property and all that stuff's important, but
there are other ways to find out.
But it's not about,
That's the way I feel about it. Like, it's just to check a box on your income tax of where you own what, and, you know, do the math on who owns that house. I mean, Sam Cooper's got another expose out talking about how some of the highest end homes, specifically in Richmond, Vancouver, and in West Vancouver, can all be tied right back to illegal casinos and money laundering and drug money. And it's like, why didn't we know that 5 years ago? Why didn't we know that 5 years ago?
And
They did.
And it's just going back to the, again, it's not. So the problem is not necessarily the you know, the solution is not necessarily the empty homes tax is not the solution. It's dealing with money laundering and dealing with illegal activities, dealing with shell companies owning houses. Dealing with all that stuff is a better way to deal with this stuff that's been going on that has heated up the market so much that it's hard to get it ever back down to a normal level. Right,
which is the goal, like you said. George, facts that were bang on the money. You called the Nanaimo by-election ahead of it. You called the Burnaby by-election ahead of it?
And I think I called out, and it came out by the Nanaimo that the support of the unions and all the money that really helped them, like the financing of all it came out afterwards, and we know. Burnaby was not much of a surprise, but...
But you called it. I'm just saying here on UnSpun, you're going to get information that's rooted in George facts. Because the reason we're using the George fact line is because we were giving you a hard time about your George facts at home, because those are not facts.
Sometimes
we're turning the tide.
Why Google something when you can just ask me?
Just ask George.
My kids, come on, you know, they say, like, George fact in my house is that there's no such thing as a cold.
No.
You're fine.
You're fine.
Get
Except
to school.
Unless it's you.
When I was a kid.
Uphill both ways in the snow.
That's right. If I'm sick, there is something going around.
Yeah. Well, that's so apropos. Okay, so this is a touchy one to talk about, but that's why it's a George fact. Is one of the first episodes where we sat down and we started talking about money laundering and the housing market and foreign ownership and what some politicians, I believe it might even have been Brad West, who brought up specifically about certain countries, certain foreign investors, and like naming it because you were called a racist in City Hall, a year and a half ago?
Well, I said, this was when we were pushing through this on the empty homes tax, and I said, I am worried that we are legitimizing a kind of racism, by doing this, that we are, and it's not about the tax, it wasn't about the tax, it's condoning discrimination in a way, and in this case a race, and it's really focused on Chinese investors, we all know that, or in case of money laundering or whatever it might be. But what's happening in my concern is that the progressives who are all upset about all these empty homes, and it's all these Chinese investors, and how dare they, and we got to fix this, Chinese investors, and so we create these policies, and we are saying, it's Chinese investors. On the other side of the spectrum, the yellow vest guys, all these guys are going, Chinese people are, and they are 100% being racist potentially, but they've
been given a license to do so because of legislation that targets a specific
Because basically it's okay
culture.
now to say a culture is hurting our economy, and it may be true, but it's you see it in the States, obviously with Trump. He's harnessed this anger, left and right on the spectrum, and used it to his advantage. And I worry that's where we're heading in Canada, where we're legitimizing a kind of racism. And I get a lot of heat for saying these things, but I think it's starting to be reported now in a way that I think is much more thoughtful, because it's really hard to explain this, especially
It
when
is.
you're up against, in my case, a bunch of vision counselors, and immediately they're attacking me, and how dare I say this, and I absolutely believe that, yeah, we need to fix all these problems that we have, but we have to be cautious that we're not creating policies that inflame racism.
There's no doubt about that. And that is a fact, a George fact, in fact. At George_Affleck on Twitter, at Jody with a Y Vance on Twitter, at UnSpun Podcast is a fun follow. Amanda Bates, our executive producer, runs it. It's very fun. Sometimes she posts
gets a big bucks for
horrible photos of us, and sometimes our fabulous shoes.
They're always good of me, actually. They're just horrible of Joe.
They're
I
really bad at me.
intentionally
They're
turn
really
them
bad at me. At theorca.ca, or at the Orca on Twitter.
Yeah, or if you're searching for this on any platforms, the Orca Media, I think, is one way to find it too.
Right, and you can subscribe to the podcast so that you can be alerted when there's a
If you're on
new.
YouTube, right below us, you can
Right
click
there.
subscribe, or on all the podcast networks.
Have they talked you into doing a column yet?
They tried to get me, but that writing is really a lot of work.
You can read my column, The Middle. It drops on Wednesdays. I like to try and
Very
find.
good column.
Thank you, George. That means a lot to me. The trying to find the center bit of really flashpoint conversations
Yeah.
like those that you bring up here all the time, where you're George facts. That's it for Unspun 12. We'll see you on 13. Are we going to go straight to 14? Is it bad luck to do 13?
The elevator stops at episode 13.
Ding.
Bye.